We made it. Happy opening day. Rosters are almost set. Bold predictions are being made, and we are oh so close to baseball. We'll talk about it coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, March 27th, 2025, better known as opening day. And as always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. This is the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's episode, we are going to talk about the latest updates as I record here on Wednesday night about the Orioles opening day roster. Not yet fully set with the two open spots, but we got a pretty good indicator on who was in Toronto for the Orioles workout day on Wednesday, who is actually going to be on that roster. Then we'll talk a bit about the Norfolk Tides break camp roster, which was announced on Wednesday, and kind of some interesting things to look at there. And finally, I did my bold predictions episode on Monday. I had you all send in your bold predictions. I'm going to grade some of my favorite ones at the end of the show. But that's all coming up on this opening day episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Before we get there, just did want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast listening platforms. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave a 5-star rating and a review. Really helps out the show. And we're here on YouTube. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. If you have any thoughts about the show, questions, whatever it may be, you can always email me, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. And I thank you for sticking with us throughout the offseason. This is the final offseason episode because technically this is being posted Thursday morning, and then just after 3 o'clock on Thursday, the Orioles begin their 2025 season in Toronto against the Blue Jays. But if you were here all offseason, I thank you so much. If you peeked in and out throughout the offseason, that's amazing too. If you take a break during the offseason and you're now rejoining because it's opening day, welcome back. It has been an interesting Orioles offseason. It should be an exciting 2025 season. And we have made it, and that is very, very exciting. But still wanted to do one more episode before the season begins, even though as of recording, and I'm going to timestamp this because some of these things could change or become official. But as I'm speaking right now, it is 8:33 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. We still do not have an official opening day roster. Now, that's not uncommon because I don't think any of the 30 teams at this point of recording have an official opening day roster. But what we do have from the Orioles is some pretty big hints. So we entered Wednesday with 24 of the Orioles' 26 opening day roster spots filled. The questions we had were who fills the final bullpen spot with Andrew Kittredge beginning the year on the IL, and who is the final infielder because Gunnar Henderson is beginning the year on the injured list as well. And while we don't know officially yet, the Orioles had their full squad workout at the Rogers Center in Toronto on Wednesday. The media was there, and we certainly got some big-time indicators. So let's begin with the bullpen spot. It was essentially down to 3 right-handers vying for the final spot: Bryan Baker, Matt Bowman, and Roansy Contreras. Now, all 3 of those guys out of minor league options. All 3 would need to be passed through waivers if they didn't make the roster, and there's only a spot for one of them. Now, I had talked about how Bryan Baker seemed to be the leader in the clubhouse with how long he's been around in Baltimore since 2021 and how good he has been with his new pitch mix and his new changeup so far in spring training. He's got the best stuff out of those 3 guys. Bowman has the best results from last year, and Contreras gives you the most length. That is pretty much what the Orioles were choosing between. It's not official, but it seems like they have chosen Bryan Baker for that final roster spot, which was my prediction when I did my opening day final roster prediction back on Tuesday. Make sure to check that one out for kind of a full breakdown of what this roster will look like heading to Toronto. But Bryan Baker was physically in Toronto. He had a locker in Toronto. And the more important part of this was neither Matt Bowman nor Roansy Contreras had a locker, I should say, at the Rogers Center. And I never saw any indication that either of them were there with the Orioles. So the assumption is that Baker is getting that final bullpen spot and Contreras and Bowman will not. Now, because both of those right-handers are out of options, they can't just be sent to AAA Norfolk, and that is why the Norfolk Tides posted their roster on Wednesday, and that's why neither Contreras nor Bowman was on their roster among the pitchers, because they can't just go to AAA. They have to be passed through waivers. Now, the Orioles don't have to make that roster move official until really just shortly before the game on Thursday. So they are still probably, as I speak here on Wednesday evening, trying not to lose either Bowman or Contreras for nothing. I'm sure they're checking in with both guys saying, hey, are you sure nothing hurts? Are you sure nothing is sore? Are you sure we can't put you on the 15-day IL just to extend this issue a little bit? And they're also calling other teams, because if the Orioles waive those guys, they could lose them for nothing. And yeah, I understand, like, Contreras has never thrown a regular season pitch for the Orioles. He was claimed 2 different times by the O's off waivers, but he's a 25-year-old right-hander who's had success as a starter in the big leagues just a couple of years ago. And I think the Orioles like his stuff and his future. And for Bowman, like, he was a nice middle reliever for the Orioles in September of last year, didn't end up making the playoff roster, but threw some big innings for the O's down the stretch. He's really funky sidearm right-hander. But these are 2 guys, Bowman and Contreras, who have been on waivers a ton over the past calendar year. So it's not a new thing for them if either of them end up on waivers. It's not like the Orioles are losing some big-time, huge relief arms. If they felt like that, they would put Bowman or Contreras on this roster over someone like Bryan Baker, and it seems fairly clear at this point that has not been the decision. So the O's basically have to decide, okay, what are the chances that Contreras and Bowman can clear waivers? If they think there's a chance, they would throw both of them potentially on waivers. Now, Matt Bowman doesn't have to accept a AAA assignment, but Contreras does. So maybe they could sneak him through. Maybe they get Bowman to accept it because they tell him, hey, if you get to AAA, you're going to be our first reliever called up whenever we need someone. That's still a pretty good spot to be in as kind of an up-down right-hander in Bowman. Or they're calling around to other teams saying, hey, do you have any open spots? Do you want Contreras? Do you want Bowman? Trying to see if they can get anything, even if it's cash, even if it's a very low-level prospect. Just get something back for these guys who both have some talent and both are major league level pitchers to be in the big leagues right now, and not lose them for nothing. So that is a kind of move that could be made. Like, you could see Thursday morning, the Orioles have traded Matt Bowman to the Athletics for cash. Like, that is absolutely something that we could see happen, just so they don't lose a guy like that for nothing. And then if he does end up on waivers later this year, I'm sure the Orioles would still certainly be interested. Now, on the position player side, it was kind of the same deal. Now, there was one spot left because Gunnar Henderson officially is going to begin the year on the injured list. He's got that mild intercostal strain. He was making progress, but just was never able to get back into spring training games, didn't get enough at-bats. Orioles said he kind of ran out of time. He is still in Sarasota taking live ABs, and the Orioles are hoping that it'll just be a minimum stint on the injured list, which would allow him to come back, I believe, next Thursday against the Red Sox, so he would only miss 6 games before he's eligible to come off the IL because it was backdated by 3 days. So that is the goal, but for those 6-7 days, you're going to still want another position player on the roster. You're not going to play a player down if you're putting him on the IL. So there was an open spot there. And for a while, it seemed like it was Livan Soto versus Luis Vasquez, 2 utility infielders who had both looked really, really good in spring. And that's because we just figured Jorge Mateo was not going to be ready for opening day. He had Tommy John surgery on his non-throwing elbow back in August. All the language from both Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde, both in the offseason and in Sarasota during spring training, was, hey, Mateo's coming along, but it's just very doubtful he's ready for opening day. And then Mateo started progressing faster than anyone thought. He felt okay throwing. He felt okay running, fielding, hitting. He got into a chunk of spring training games over the past week and a half. And we're still at the point where it's possible for Mateo to actually come back and make the roster. Now, Mateo also did stay in Sarasota along with Gunnar Henderson to continue to take live ABs. And the Orioles basically said, look, they optioned Luis Vasquez. They didn't option Livan Soto. And it was basically, hey, this final spot is down to Livan Soto or Jorge Mateo. If Mateo takes live ABs for the next 3 days in Sarasota, that was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and feels really good, we'll fly him to Toronto and activate him, and he'll get that final spot as the utility infielder. If Mateo doesn't feel good enough, he'll start the year on the injured list, and Livan Soto, the infielder who was with the Orioles for a chunk of last season, will get that final spot. What we know now from Wednesday is that Soto is physically in Toronto. He has a locker in the visiting clubhouse. Mateo is not physically there and does not have a locker. So it's very similar to the Baker situation where nothing is official, but it feels like it's going to be Soto who gets the spot, and Mateo will begin the year on the injured list. Again, that is subject to change, but that was my prediction from Tuesday, and that seems to be happening. With these two guys on the roster, Baker will just be a middle reliever for this team. I mean, if I did a bullpen power rankings for the trust value that I do throughout the season right now, I would put Bryan Baker probably in the don't trust. Well, I don't want to put anyone in don't trust, but he would be in maybe trust to begin the season. And I would rank him 8th out of 8 relievers in terms of who I trusted most in a high leverage spot right now, just because we've seen the struggles he's had over the past 2 years. He's going to be the number 8 man in that bullpen. I even think Albert Suarez, who's kind of the long man, could be in a bigger spot than Bryan Baker. They're going to bring him along in some low leverage spots early in the year, see how he's pitching, and then maybe Baker could get unleashed in bigger spots as the year goes on. For Liván Soto, the hope is, if he is indeed the one who gets this roster spot, it's going to be a very short-term thing. The hope is he's on the team for a week, Gunnar Henderson gets activated, and Soto just gets optioned to AAA to remain as good infield depth for the Orioles in Norfolk. I would imagine Soto maybe starts one game. If Gunnar comes back after missing the 6 games, maybe Soto starts one of the 6 at shortstop. Otherwise, you're going to see Jackson Holliday play shortstop in Gunnar Henderson's absence. That's where he was taking ground balls on Wednesday. And then the report was that it was mostly Jordan Westburg at second base, Ramon Arias at third base when they were doing infield drills. I've talked about how the metrics have kind of flipped. And last year, metrically, Jordan Westburg was a good defender at third, a bad defender at second, whereas Ramon Arias was a solid defender at second and a really bad defender at third. So it made sense that if the Orioles had to do this alignment, it would be Westburg playing third and Arias playing second defensively with Holliday at shortstop. The issue is the Orioles, I think, might do that some, but they clearly would rather have it still, Arias, who did win the Gold Glove at third base in 2022, over at third, and then Westburg at second. My thinking there is that there's obviously something the Orioles see in their scouting reports internally in their data that they feel Arias at third, Westburg at second is the better alignment. And my guess would be what they see has something to do with turning double plays, not as much about the arm or the range of those positions or whatever it may be, but something that doesn't come up as much in kind of those deeper StatCast metrics is they must just feel that Westburg is much better at turning a double play on the bag than Arias is and taking throws from the third baseman or the shortstop and making that throw over to first. And that's probably what they're valuing here. Now, hopefully they don't have to worry about it for very long. Gunnar comes back, Westburg to third, Holliday goes back to second, Arias becomes your utility infielder, but that's kind of what they're dealing with at this moment and what they will most likely open the season with. But although we don't have an Orioles roster at the big league level, we did get a AAA break camp roster on Wednesday for the Norfolk Tides. We will talk about that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Now, baseball season, it is finally here, and there is no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. You can build your lineup every week. This week, I'm going with Aaron Judge, more than 1 home run. Shohei Ohtani, more than 1 stolen base. Those seem like pretty good options. It's truly that easy. Setting up a lineup, it takes less than 60 seconds. And when you win, your payout is quick, safe, and secure. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's at Prize Picks. Run your game. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, you can use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's at supplyhouse.com. So from the big league Orioles, we move to the AAA Norfolk Tides. And obviously, we're not going to be watching the Tides as much as maybe we were during the rebuild when a lot of the talent was in AAA. But the Tides announced their break camp roster. Their opening day is on Friday, one day after the big league Orioles. And it was kind of interesting to see some of the players that were on that list. Obviously, we didn't see guys like Matt Bowman or Roansy Contreras. As I said, it didn't really key us into any of the final opening day roster decisions that the Orioles are going to make. But I thought there were some players that we should kind of take a look at as this AAA season begins. Because again, with MILB TV, every game is broadcasted, and now every AAA game has StatCast as well that is publicly available. So you can go and look up data from any AAA game and really see, how hard are guys throwing, what's the exit velocities, what's the spin rate, what's the movement. A lot of good stuff to help you scout these guys a little bit better and take a look at what they're going to be whenever they do get to the big leagues. Now, if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, you'll see I'm throwing up this tweet from the Norfolk Tides official Twitter account, which just kind of showed their break camp roster here for 2025. And just wanted to talk through 5 players that I'll be watching closely when this Norfolk Tides season begins. The first one is fairly obvious. That is Coby Mayo, who was optioned to AAA, didn't make the team out of spring training. Wasn't really a spot for him, and we kind of knew that, but he was clearly very frustrated, made it known to the media after the news was broken to him last week that he did not make the team. Kind of walked back some of his statements to apologize for it, but I don't hold anything against Coby Mayo. He's a guy who's going to AAA, who has been in the big leagues and feels he's a big league talent. Like, I would be frustrated as well if I was going back to Norfolk, but he's going to be the number one guy that the eyes are on. The first thing to look for is how much and where he's playing defense, what his split is between third base and first base when he's out there defensively. His main position is third base, but the Orioles have kind of made it known, like, they mostly see Mayo more as a first baseman moving forward, some because he struggled defensively at third base and he just is better at first, and also because of a roster fit. Like, the Orioles are going to be pretty set for a while at third base with Jordan Westburg, Gunnar at short, Holiday at second. But Ryan O'Hearn is a free agent after this year. Ryan Mountcastle has had some production problems and is a free agent after next year. That is where the opening would be for someone like Coby Mayo, and I think they want to continue to get him more reps at first base. So I'm really intrigued to see where he plays defensively. And then you also just want to look at how much is he swinging and missing. He whiffed on a lot of breaking balls this spring, and a lot of them in his kind of struggles in his short major league stint late in the 2024 season when he debuted. So it's AAA pitching. It's a large gap between big league pitching, but how is he handling breaking balls? Is he continuing to rake? And does he look ready for whenever the Orioles would need to call him up this year? The second guy to watch is pretty obvious as well. That is Samuel Basallo. Coby Mayo is the Orioles' number 2 prospect right now. Basallo is the number 1 prospect in this system. Now, he's not going to catch for a little while. As I talked about on yesterday's episode, Basallo is dealing with some right elbow inflammation. It's not going to put him on the injured list, but for a little while in AAA, he's going to be a DH only. He will not be catching as to rest that right arm. It's a right elbow that he also had an issue with in spring training in 2024, and he had to DH and play first base for a while early in the season. He'll probably DH for a bit, then he'll probably start playing a little bit of first base, and then hopefully by May or something, Basallo is back behind the plate. The biggest thing to watch is really his catching defense development. Unfortunately, we won't get to see that for a little while, but you'll still get to see him face the highest level of pitching he ever has, because all he got was a cup of coffee, a week at AAA at the end of last year. This is his first real taste of AAA baseball. How does he handle AAA lefties? How does he handle AAA pitching altogether? Are the exit velo numbers and distances and the stats still as eye-popping as they've been in AA? That is really what I'm watching for with Basallo. And excuse me, he did get more than a week at AAA last year. But again, this will be a much larger sample size for him. Number 3 on this list is Brandon Young. I would not be surprised if Young is the opening day starter for the Norfolk Tides. This was a rotation that could have had Cade Povich and Chase McDermott and Trevor Rogers in it, but Cade's in the big leagues and McDermott and Rogers both starting the year on the AAA injured list. So Brandon Young, who had a great season last year in AA and AAA, was added to the 40-man roster this offseason, looked good in big league spring training. He will begin the year in AAA, probably as the number one starter in that rotation. I want to see, what does the stuff look like? Has he made any changes? And does he look big league ready? Because right now, if the Orioles needed more pitching depth, if they suffered more injuries because McDermott and Rogers and Grayson Rodriguez are injured, and because Kyle Gibson still needs some time to build up, Brandon Young is basically the Orioles' number 7 starter. You've got the 5 starters in the rotation, Eflin and Morton, and then Dean Kramer's going to go game 3, Sugano game 4, and Povich game 5. And then you have Albert Suarez, who's going to be the long man in the bullpen, but would be the spot starter if they needed it. The next guy up is Brandon Young right now for the Orioles. So I'm really going to be looking at those first couple of starts, and does he look big league ready in case more bad stuff happens to the Orioles' arms and they need to call on Young from AAA. Number 4 on this list, I would say, is Dylan Beavers. I think between the two outfielders, they have Dylan Carlson down there in AAA and Daz Cameron, the more veteran depth pieces, but Judd Fabian and Dylan Beavers are down there. I think Beavers is closer to the big leagues at this point, just in his talent level, and I think he'll debut before Fabian does, or at least he's a better player, I think, than Judd Fabian is, at least at this point. And again, he's a guy who got a short stint at AAA at the end of last year, but I really want to see how he handles AAA pitching, because if the Orioles have some injuries and Beavers is performing well, he could debut in the second half of 2025. That's certainly a possibility for the former, competitive balance round pick pretty early in the draft a couple of years ago for the Orioles. Gone through a lot of swing changes. That still looks pretty interesting. I want to see how it holds up against, again, a higher level of pitching in AAA. And then finally, number 5 on my list is Colin Selby. You can see him listed in the pitchers for the Norfolk Tides. Selby, a right-handed reliever with crazy good stuff, interesting fastballs, high 90s, really, really awesome breaking balls. Came over on waivers to the Orioles last year, pitched in a few games in the big leagues for the O's, actually surprisingly made the Orioles playoff roster. He didn't pitch in either of those wildcard games against the Royals, but he was on the roster, kind of took Matt Bowman's spot. And so we went into this year like, hey, Selby was on the postseason roster. The Orioles bullpen seems pretty set, but if there is any opening, Selby might be the first guy they go to. And then there was an opening, right? Because Andrew Kittredge, who was signed to a $10 million deal to be in this bullpen, got knee surgery and is going to begin the year on the injured list. And you would have thought, hey, Colin Selby is going to be one of the front runners for this job. Instead, Selby made 1 spring training appearance, gave up 4 runs in less than an inning, and was like immediately optioned to minor league camp. He was the first player on the 40-man roster by far to be sent to minor league camp this spring, and we just kind of didn't see him after that in Sarasota or in Twin Lakes or whatever. And so I was kind of worried, like, is Selby injured? Is there something they're working on? Is there something they're hiding? It's a good sign that he is listed on this AAA break camp roster. He is a guy with minor league options, so that's why he's just able to begin the year in Norfolk. That's certainly a good sign. I still want to make sure it's not going to be on the IL, and instead he'll be pitching. But I'm really intrigued to see that first Colin Selby outing out of the Tides bullpen. What does he look like? Does it look different? Is the velocity down? Do we see some sort of injury, and try and figure out why the heck he pitched in 1 spring training game and then just went right to minor league camp? It was very odd for a guy who seemed like he was in the mix to make the opening day roster. But had Colin Selby been healthy, he probably would have been one of my bold prediction guys for this year, making a big impact on the Oriole bullpen. But at this point, that feels too bold to me, because we just don't know what you're going to get from him after not seeing him this spring. But I did make 4 bold predictions back on Monday's episode, and then I asked you all to give me some bold predictions, and you delivered. I'm going to read out some of my favorites and grade them out a little bit coming up after this to finish off the show. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1-ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love really the variety of the classic, right, with the shells on them, but many people love the no shells variety, which is a great snack as well, because it's perfect for the grab and go snack on a road trip. You need a quick protein boost. They can be your go-to, and they've got amazing flavors at Wonderful Pistachios as well. They keep you guessing every time, and it can be really that perfect snack on the go for that no shells variety. But I also love the classic of just cracking open that shell, get the satisfying crunch. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. So I want to finish off today's episode, the final segment of this show of the offseason, to grade some of your bold predictions. After I did my bold predictions episode on Monday, make sure to go back and check that one out. I asked you for bold predictions, and I graded some of the ones you sent in. So I'm going to do them on a 1 to 5 scale. If I graded a 5, that is being the most bold, that is like, wow, is this even going to happen? That's super bold. I love it. Number 1 on the scale would be, this isn't even a bold prediction at all. This is probably going to happen. Obviously, 2, 3, and 4 is somewhere in between. Let's start with Mike, who sends one via email. Jordan Westburg stays healthy all season and finally gets the recognition he deserves. Now, I almost gave this a 1 because it's like, it's not bold to say a guy stays healthy. And Jordan Westburg did miss 2 months last year, but it was because he got hit on the hand by a fastball. It wasn't because he's injury prone. He just had a freak injury happen that kept him out. So that's not super bold. But the one thing is for Westburg is that I kind of feel like he's going to be an under the radar guy his whole career. So the reason I'm giving this a 2 out of 5 is that Westburg finally getting the recognition he deserves. I'm not sure that may ever happen. So that's the bold part of this that I am taking. Daniel on YouTube had another Westburg prediction. Jordan Westburg hits 30 home runs and surpasses Jose Ramirez for the WAR leader at third base in the major leagues. I'll give this one a 3 out of 5. Westburg hit 18 home runs last year when he missed 2 months. So 30 is possible if he stays healthy for the whole year. But passing Ramirez is tough. Jose Ramirez is one of the best players in baseball. 6.5 Fangraphs WAR in 2024 to lead third baseman. Westburg would have to do a lot more to get to that level. As good as I think Jordan Westburg is, that's going to be real tough to do what Jose Ramirez does, especially with all the stolen bases he has and the home run power. Like, you got to really have an unbelievable season to do just that. Speaking of stolen bases and home run power, Ethan's bold prediction via email is, quote, 4 Orioles will have a 2020 season. That is a season with 20 home runs and 20 stolen bases. Gunnar Henderson, Colton Cowser, Cedric Mullins, and Jackson Holliday. Now, this is a 4 out of 5 for me on the boldness scale because only 19 players in all of Major League Baseball put up a 2020 season last year, and no team had more than 2. The Reds had Elly De La Cruz and Spencer Steer, and the Mariners had Julio Rodriguez and Randy Arozarena, and that only counts somewhat because Randy was traded from the Rays to the Mariners mid-season. It's not like he did all of that with Seattle. So for a one team to have 4 is pretty incredible. Now, I will say Gunnar did do it last year. He had 37 homers and 21 steals. I think he'll do it again. Cedric Mullins almost did it, 32 steals and 18 home runs. I'm not sure Mullins plays enough to get to the 20 homers, but he was very close last year, so I don't see why he couldn't do it. Jackson Holliday, again, didn't play a lot, 5 homers and 4 steals, absolutely could. And then Colton Cowser, 24 home runs, but only 9 stolen bases. I think he'd be the furthest one away to do it. So I'm giving it not a 5 because they all could do it, but it's so unlikely that 4 guys on one team stay healthy enough to go and do that I give it a 4. But wow, would that be awesome if it did happen, like the prediction from Ethan. Jake, via email, says, Cionel Perez will not catch a home run in his hat this season. That is a 5 on the boldness scale. Perez is the GOAT at doing this. He did it, 6, 7 times last year. It will happen again. The Orioles will hit plenty of home runs, especially into their own bullpen in Baltimore. There's no way he doesn't catch at least one unless he spends like the entire year on the injured list. This is a 5 on the boldness scale. Vivek via YouTube, Cade Povich finishes top 15 in AL Cy Young. I'll give it a 4 on the boldness scale. Not entirely impossible. Now, they only generally announce like 10 to 12 guys that get votes. It's not always that 15 guys get votes. So it'll be tough to see him finishing, quote, top 15. But Yusei Kikuchi finished 9th last year, got a couple of votes. He had a 4.05 ERA in about 176 innings. Cade Povich could maybe do that, but that is finishing very high in the voting for your first full big league season. That's a 4 out of 5 on that one. Another Cade Povich one comes from Orioles Bird Watcher on YouTube. Cade Povich makes 25 starts and pitches his way into the rotation. I'll give this a 2 out of 5 on the boldness scale. I think this is going to happen, to be honest, but I'm not giving it a 1 because, in theory, if Grayson Rodriguez doesn't get hurt a couple of weeks ago, Povich is probably beginning the year in AAA. So there wasn't even a spot for him. So the fact that he would just grab this spot because of an injury and then hold it down makes it a little bit bolder to get it to a 2. But this is something I seriously think, now that he has that chance, is going to happen this season. Dylan via YouTube says Tomoyuki Sugano finishes top 5 in Cy Young voting. I'm going to give that a 5. Like, I love Sugano. He's a 3-time MVP over an NPB in Japan, one of the greatest pitchers over there. But it can take a while somewhat for it to translate. And top 5 in Cy Young, like Corbin Burns finished 5th in AL Cy Young voting last year. Can Sugano give you Burns-like production? I really highly doubt that, but I love the bold prediction, and a 5 there for Dylan. Mike via YouTube says 3 Orioles infielders are all-star game starters. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5. It is really hard to get a lot of your team voted in like that. You would assume then if it's going to be 3 of them, it would be Gunnar Henderson, all-star last year, Jordan Westburg, all-star last year, and then either Jackson Holliday or one of the first basemen, obviously Ryan Mountcastle or Ryan O'Hearn. Don't think either of those guys play enough because they're in a kind of a platoon to get it. And I'm not really expecting Jackson to be an all-star. And then also, Gunnar's fighting with Bobby Witt Jr. and Westburg's fighting with Jose Ramirez to be an all-star starter. There's just so much working against it that I'll give it a 4 out of 5 on boldness. The Knowles on YouTube says 5 Orioles will receive an MVP vote this year. I'm giving this a 5 on the boldness scale. 2 O's got them last year. It was Gunnar, finished 4th, and then Santander got a few votes as well. 3 Astros got votes last year. That was the most in the American League. Yordan Alvarez, Jose Altuve, and then Framber Valdez got 1 vote, so 3 of them got votes. The 5 would probably be Gunnar, Adley, Jordan Westburg, Colton Cowser, Zach Eflin, or maybe Jackson Holliday if he goes off. Like, that would be your 5. It is really, really hard to have 5 players on one team get MVP votes because you only get, I think, 10 players on your MVP ballot. So to get 5 of them on there doesn't all have to be from the same person, but that is just so tough. That is a 5 out of 5 on the boldness scale. And finally, Fogus via YouTube says Adley Rutschman will finish the year with 8 WAR. This is a 4 out of 5 on the boldness scale for me. Only 5 players in all of baseball finished with at least 8 wins above replacement via Fangraphs. Aaron Judge, Bobby Witt Jr., Shohei Ohtani, Juan Soto, and Gunnar Henderson were the only 5 to do that. Adley would be in big-time company, and it's only been done by a catcher an 8-WAR season on Fangraphs 3 times since the turn of the century, since 2000. Brian McCann in 2008, 8.3 WAR. Joe Mauer in 2008, 8.3 WAR, and Buster Posey in 2012, 9.3 WAR, are the only 3 catchers to do it in a season since 2000. Do I think Adley's ceiling is as good as those guys? Yeah, I think I do, but man, it is tough to do this. But if someone's going to do it as a catcher, it'll be Adley, so that's why it's a 4, not a 5, but still very bold, and I love the prediction there from Fogus. Love the predictions. Thanks everyone for sending them in. One more thing before we go, just had a shout out to give here. Just wanted to wish Justin Florian and Bailey a happy 1-year anniversary. This courtesy of Bailey. Justin, thank you so much for listening, watching, supporting the show. Hope you keep tuning in all season. Keep supporting the show. Keep supporting the Orioles. Going to be a fun season here on the Locked On Orioles podcast. And I thank you, Justin. I thank everyone out there for tuning in all off season. And here we go. Final offseason episode. It's now over. We go into the season today. Here is the plan for today. Orioles and Blue Jays, 3:07 p.m. on MASN. Zach Eflin versus Jose Barrios. If the Orioles win this game, I may go live after the game on Thursday afternoon, evening to recap opening day. If the Orioles lose, the episode's coming Friday to recap opening day and then get you ready for the final 3 games of the series this weekend. I only say maybe if the Orioles win because I'm just going to be candid with you all. There's a fairly important Maryland basketball game happening at 7:30 p.m. on Thursday night that I would like to be somewhere to watch. And depending on how long this Orioles opening day takes and my schedule on Thursday with work and other things, it could be a little tough. So bear with me. If I don't go live, try to let you all know. At the worst, you'll have a Friday morning episode recapping everything happening on opening day. But enjoy opening day. Orioles and Blue Jays. Baseball is back. Let's get it. I cannot wait. It is a joyous, joyous day to get this baseball season started. And either way, I'll be back with you for another episode this week, recapping everything we see from game 1 of 162 in this 2025 Orioles season. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.